Behind their white coats, they claimed to heal. But in the shadows of the Reich, Nazi doctors became architects of cruelty. After the war, their reckoning was as brutal as their crimes. If you value documented World War II history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. Now back to the story. Behind white coats, a darker agenda unfolded. Nazi doctors, once entrusted with the care of human life, became architects of suffering and death. Across concentration camps and occupied territories, they conducted experiments that defied all notions of ethics, morality, and humanity. Prisoners were subjected to hypothermia tests, forced sterilizations, and chemical exposure, often with lethal results. The veneer of medical professionalism masked systematic cruelty, creating a chilling paradox. Those sworn to heal instead inflicted unimaginable pain. The audience is immediately drawn into moral tension, curiosity, and horror. As the stark contrast between authority and atrocity is laid bare, these physicians operated under ideological directives, blending science with fanaticism. Experiments were rationalized as contributions to racial hygiene, population control, or military advancement. Yet the victims, prisoners, children, and the infirm experienced suffering beyond comprehension. Limbs froze in ice baths, infectious diseases were deliberately introduced, and surgical procedures were performed without anesthesia, leaving the wounded to suffer. Diaries and testimonies from camp survivors provide chilling insight, revealing the depth of cruelty orchestrated by those who wielded scalpels with deadly intent. For viewers, the narrative provokes both moral outrage and a compelling fascination with the mechanisms of systematic inhumanity. Beyond the camps, sterilization programs targeted civilians deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. State-run policies empowered doctors to enforce eugenic ideology through coercive and often irreversible procedures. Families were stripped of reproductive rights, and communities were marked by fear and helplessness. The narrative emphasizes the pervasive reach of medical authority corrupted by ideology, drawing the audience's attention to both the individual perpetrators and the systemic machinery that enabled atrocities. Suspense builds as viewers understand that these crimes were not isolated incidents, but components of an orchestrated, bureaucratic network of violence. The psychological dimension of these crimes is equally stark. Doctors rationalized their actions, invoking loyalty to the Reich, the pursuit of scientific advancement, or obedience to superior orders. Some displayed genuine ideological conviction. Others acted out of fear or opportunism. Witness accounts and post-war confessions reveal the moral dissonance required to perform such acts under the guise of legitimacy. The audience is invited to grapple with the unsettling complexity of human behavior under authority, the interplay of conscience, and the horrifying normalization of cruelty. Ultimately, the legacy of the Nazi medical elite is a testament to the dangers of ethical corruption, ideological extremism, and unchecked authority. These acts of cruelty serve as stark reminders that the power of science and medicine can be weaponized when morality is abandoned. For viewers, the section engages curiosity, emotional response, and moral reflection, laying the foundation for understanding the post-war accountability and the enduring lessons of history. Each account, each documented atrocity, underscores the magnitude of these violations, compelling the audience to confront the ethical abyss that existed behind the sterile facade of white coats. With the Reich collapsing, those once untouchable faced an uncertain fate. The hospitals, laboratories, and research facilities that had been epicenters of cruelty were abandoned or seized, leaving Nazi doctors exposed to the chaos of defeat. Orders that had once granted them impunity evaporated overnight, replaced by the omnipresent scrutiny of Allied forces. The corridors that had echoed with the authority of medical command were now silent, haunted by the weight of deeds committed in secrecy. The audience is immediately drawn into suspense, wondering who would survive, who would be held accountable, and how justice would unfold. As Berlin fell and the Allies advanced, the medical elite realized that their positions of power offered no shield against consequences. Some fled, attempting to blend into the general population, assuming false identities, or seeking refuge in remote territories. Others were captured in the rubble of hospitals or research complexes, taken into custody as the machinery of accountability began to move. Historical records and testimonies reveal the confusion, fear, and disorientation of this period, providing a tense and immersive backdrop for viewers. Suspense is heightened as each officer faces the abrupt inversion of authority, once commanding life and death, now subject to external judgment and scrutiny. The initial detainment of Nazi doctors was chaotic, yet purposeful. Allied investigators moved quickly to identify key figures, relying on camp records, survivor accounts, and captured documentation. Officers who had once ordered or conducted experiments now faced the stark reality of interrogation, exposure, and potential trial. The narrative details both procedural and personal dimensions. Some doctors were cooperative, hoping for leniency, while others resisted, attempting to minimize or deny involvement. The audience is drawn into the psychological tension, anticipating the outcomes of these confrontations between ideology and accountability. Amid this collapse, the reversal of power dynamics was striking. The doctors who had wielded authority over prisoners and manipulated life under the guise of medical science found themselves vulnerable, at the mercy of those they had once deemed inferior. The structures that had enabled their crimes, the bureaucracy, hierarchy, and ideological apparatus had crumbled, leaving individuals isolated and exposed. This shift creates suspense and engagement for viewers, who witness the stark transformation from absolute control to precarious exposure. The fall of the medical regime also set the stage for broader ethical reckoning. Beyond individual consequences, the collapse exposed the dangers of intertwining medicine with ideology, reminding the world of the fragility of moral safeguards when authority goes unchecked. For the audience, this section fosters curiosity and moral reflection, emphasizing both the human and systemic dimensions of post-war accountability. The doctor's plight becomes a lens through which viewers examine the reversal of fortune, the inevitability of justice, and the broader lessons about ethical responsibility under extreme conditions. In the courtroom, lives and legacies hung by a thread. The world watched as Nazi doctors, once considered untouchable figures of medical authority, faced the full weight of post-war justice. The doctor's trial, part of the Nuremberg proceedings, brought these men from anonymity and secrecy into the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Detailed evidence, meticulously collected from concentration camps, laboratories, and survivor testimonies, laid bare the atrocities committed under the guise of science. Each case revealed the scale and systematic nature of medical crimes, immersing the audience in moral outrage and historical tension. Witnesses recounted chilling experiments, prisoners exposed to extreme cold, infectious diseases, chemical injections, and sterilization procedures that caused untold suffering. Photographs, diagrams, and camp records were presented to demonstrate not only individual involvement, but also the bureaucratic coordination that enabled these crimes. The doctors themselves attempted various defenses: claims of obedience to orders, scientific pursuit, or ignorance of broader outcomes, but each argument was meticulously countered by cross-examination and corroborating evidence. The audience experiences suspense and ethical reflection, anticipating whether justice would be served and how responsibility would be apportioned. The tribunals also highlighted the complex interplay between legal procedure and moral accountability. Judges navigated the unprecedented challenge of defining crimes against humanity within a framework of international law. Every piece of testimony, every document, and every witness statement carried weight, shaping the fates of defendants and setting historical precedents. Viewers are drawn into this intricate process, understanding that these trials were not merely punitive, but served as a moral and legal reckoning for the world. The suspense derives from both procedural deliberation and the gravity of decisions that could result in life or death. Sentencing was a moment of dramatic resolution. Some doctors received capital punishment, executed for their roles in atrocities, while others were sentenced to lengthy imprisonment. The disparities in outcomes reflected both the severity of crimes and the nuanced evaluation of individual responsibility. The courtroom became a space where ideology, science, and ethics collided, revealing the human cost of systemic cruelty and the painstaking efforts to restore moral order. For the audience, this section creates tension, emotional engagement, and intellectual curiosity as they consider the consequences of moral failure under the guise of professional authority. Beyond immediate justice, the Nuremberg trials established a historical record, ensuring that the actions of these medical professionals could never be forgotten. Detailed transcripts, visual documentation, and public accounts created a permanent archive of atrocities and accountability. For viewers, this provides closure while simultaneously provoking moral and ethical reflection. What responsibility does power entail, and how do societies confront violations of humanity? The suspense and engagement of this narrative lie in witnessing the collision of past crimes with the pursuit of justice, leaving the audience absorbed in the dramatic unfolding of accountability. Justice, swift and unflinching, exacted a heavy toll on the Nazi doctors who had once wielded immense power over life and death. Following the Nuremberg doctors' trial and other post-war tribunals, the convicted faced sentences ranging from lengthy imprisonment to execution. The courtroom drama gave way to the finality of legal and moral reckoning, as the world demanded that those who had violated human dignity pay the price for their actions. The audience is immediately immersed in suspense, anticipating how historical justice would manifest in the fates of these perpetrators. Execution methods were deliberate and methodical, intended both as punishment and as a statement of accountability. Hanging was the most common form applied to those condemned to death, administered with strict adherence to procedural protocol. Prisoners were escorted under heavy guard, and the executions were documented meticulously, leaving no ambiguity about the consequences of their crimes. The narrative emphasizes the stark contrast between the controlled environment of punishment and the chaotic, destructive world these doctors had once contributed to, engaging viewers' sense of moral closure and historical justice. Imprisonment, for those not sentenced to death, was equally severe. Prison conditions, labor requirements, and the psychological weight of confinement imposed a harsh reality that mirrored the consequences of the crimes committed. Many of the doctors reflected upon their actions while isolated, confronted with survivor testimonies and the undeniable moral and legal reckoning of their deeds. For the audience, this dimension builds empathy and moral contemplation, highlighting the personal cost of ethical violations while sustaining narrative suspense. The process of carrying out sentences was documented extensively, creating an archival record for future generations. Every step from courtroom verdicts to the implementation of punishment was recorded to ensure transparency and historical accountability. Photographs, official reports, and witness accounts preserved both the methodical nature of justice and the symbolic weight it carried, reinforcing the societal commitment to never forget the atrocities committed. Viewers are drawn into this layered historical narrative, understanding that punishment was not only retributive but also a tool for education, remembrance, and moral reflection. Ethically, the sentencing and executions serve as a powerful lens into the consequences of violating human rights under the guise of authority. The doctors fall from positions of influence to subjects of legal and moral scrutiny, demonstrates the inevitable accountability that follows unchecked power. The audience is invited to reflect on the broader implications, how professional authority must always be tempered by ethical responsibility, and how historical reckoning preserves lessons for generations. The narrative fosters both emotional engagement and intellectual reflection, making viewers contemplate the moral dimensions of justice and the human capacity for cruelty and accountability. Ultimately, the sentences and executions of Nazi doctors brought both historical closure and a moral message. Justice, though imperfect, sought to redress the suffering inflicted by these individuals, leaving a permanent record of consequences. For viewers, this section delivers suspense, emotional resonance, and ethical contemplation. bridging the gap between historical documentation and enduring lessons about power, morality, and accountability. Their deeds serve as warnings for generations to come. The legacy of Nazi doctors reverberates far beyond the courtroom and prison walls, leaving an indelible imprint on the history of medicine, ethics, and collective memory. While the immediate post-war trials delivered justice, the enduring impact lies in how these individuals are remembered, studied, and discussed in historical scholarship, medical ethics courses, and public consciousness. The audience is drawn into reflection, contemplating the consequences of unchecked authority and the moral responsibilities inherent in professions entrusted with human life. Historians meticulously document the actions of these medical professionals, detailing both the atrocities committed and the bureaucratic systems that enabled them. Their work serves not only to preserve the facts, but also to explore the human psychology behind compliance, obedience, and moral failure. Scholars examine diaries, trial transcripts, and survivor testimonies to provide context, revealing how ideology, ambition, and fear intertwined to produce systematic cruelty. For viewers, this historical examination generates curiosity and ethical engagement, offering insight into the mechanisms that allowed science to be weaponized against humanity. In public consciousness, the memory of Nazi doctors has evolved over decades. Documentaries, books, and exhibitions highlight both the horrors perpetrated and the lessons learned, emphasizing the importance of ethical vigilance in medicine and beyond. Some of the doctors' names have become synonymous with inhumanity, serving as cautionary symbols, while others faded into obscurity, their actions preserved only in historical archives. The audience experiences a reflective tension between what is remembered and what risks being forgotten, underscoring the fragile nature of collective memory and the importance of education in preventing the repetition of atrocities. The field of medical ethics has been profoundly shaped by the legacy of these individuals. Institutional protocols, research oversight, and international codes of conduct, such as the Nuremberg Code, emerged directly from the reckoning with their crimes. These frameworks ensure that human subjects are treated with dignity and that scientific inquiry cannot override ethical imperatives. For viewers, this connection between past atrocities and contemporary safeguards reinforces moral engagement and intellectual reflection, highlighting the enduring relevance of historical memory. Ultimately, the historical memory of Nazi doctors is a complex interplay of justice, scholarship, and moral pedagogy. Their actions continue to provoke debate, ethical consideration, and critical examination of how systems, professions, and societies can both enable and prevent abuses of power. For the audience, this section encouraged both emotional engagement and contemplative reflection, leaving viewers to consider the profound responsibility inherent in positions of authority and the enduring lessons of conscience, accountability, and human dignity. The past teaches what must never be repeated. The atrocities committed by Nazi doctors serve as a stark reminder that the authority of medical professionals carries immense responsibility. From the horrors of experimentation in concentration camps to the systematic abuse of human subjects, history demonstrates that science and authority, when divorced from ethics, can become instruments of unimaginable suffering. For viewers, this section encouraged reflection on the enduring relevance of moral vigilance, professional accountability, and the human cost of ignoring conscience. Modern medical ethics, human rights law, and research protocols have been profoundly shaped by these historical lessons. Codes such as the Nuremberg Code, established in response to the doctor's trial, set standards for informed consent, humane treatment, and oversight in clinical research. Institutional review boards, ethical committees, and international human rights frameworks ensure that medical practice cannot proceed without accountability, scrutiny, and ethical compliance. The audience is invited to connect past atrocities with contemporary safeguards, understanding how historical failures inform present-day protections. The consequences of ignoring ethics resonate beyond medicine. Nazi doctors exemplified how obedience to authority, combined with ideological fervor, can override individual conscience, resulting in moral and societal collapse. Contemporary institutions, governments, and professional hierarchies face similar dilemmas when policy, ambition, or peer pressure threatens to compromise human welfare. For viewers, this draws a direct line between historical events and ongoing moral responsibility, encouraging critical reflection on the choices made in everyday life and professional contexts. Case studies in contemporary ethics often reference these historical precedents, illustrating scenarios where informed consent, autonomy, and ethical oversight are non-negotiable. Scholars and educators use the example of Nazi doctors to provoke moral reasoning, stimulate debate, and instill a sense of responsibility in future generations. The audience is engaged intellectually, considering the intersection of authority, morality, and societal accountability, while also experiencing the suspense of imagining how human behavior can diverge dramatically under coercive or ideological pressures. Ultimately, the legacy of these doctors underscores the imperative of moral courage, vigilance, and systemic accountability. Ethical lapses are not simply individual failings, they reflect societal, institutional, and cultural vulnerabilities that must be addressed proactively. By studying these historical events, viewers gain insight into the fragility of human rights and the enduring importance of conscience under authority. The narrative provides closure while leaving lingering curiosity and moral reflection, ensuring that the lessons of history continue to resonate and guide behavior across generations. The past, though distant, remains a mirror for contemporary society. The choices made by those in power, the structures that enable or constrain action, and the vigilance of ethical oversight determine whether human dignity is preserved or violated. For the audience, the story concludes not only with historical awareness, but also with a call to consider personal, professional, and societal responsibility, cementing both emotional engagement and intellectual contemplation.